Hello and welcome back to the OMG MotoGP podcast, your Thai Grand Prix review edition. And I'm your host, Renita Vermeulen. And of course, we are joined by Mr. Keith Hewen. But this week, we also have your other favorite OMG host, Miss Amy Reynolds. Welcome, guys. What a weekend we had in Thailand. We had records broken. We had another championship won. And that was all before the MotoGP race even began, right?
This is going to blow the trolls' mind having both of you on here.
Yeah, I did think that.
All I can say is bad luck, trolls.
And for those who are listening, Keith just flipped everyone the bird. So
it's good to have you both here, I've got to say. And what a great Grand Prix again. I mean, a great Grand Prix, not necessarily from a racing point of view. That was a bit up and down, and with the weather being what it is. But it's a great Grand Prix from an event point of view. I mean, the Thais really do it really, really well. 205,000 people over the weekend. Weather was a bit iffy, but the enthusiasm you get there is absolutely infectious. It really is. From the time you get off the plane or out the hire car, whatever your mode of transport to Buriram might have been, it's just one of them great events that you've got to go to. And of course, Thailand, not that I'm biased, is one of those countries that you just naturally get on with. It's not a difficult country to either drive around, find your way around, transport around, food around, 24-hour, whatever you want, all of the time. It just works for Grand Prix people.
I have to say, I love when you can hear the crowd, the track cameras pick up the noise from the crowd. Any Grand Prix where you have a bit of that and you get their reaction, I just think is brilliant. And Thailand obviously was absolutely packed to the rafters. So just like the noise from that grandstand on the main straight was just amazing. And it, like Keith said, the enthusiasm that they show, like the MotoGP riders are absolute rock stars out there. So that's always cool.
It's going to be even bigger next year when we kick off in March, because obviously with Somkhet Chantra being in the LCR team, in Lucio Cecchetaro Racing's team, it's going to be massive to have a Thai in Grand Prix. Shame it's on a Honda, but there you go. Needs must, and it will still be a massive event. I think that Thailand in general does it quite well. I mean, the track was built, if you remember when they first tested there, I remember Valentino Rossi saying something along the lines of, and this isn't obviously a direct quote, but something along the lines of, why do we need this track? Why do we need to go to Thailand? It was the kind of attitude right at the beginning. And the track, when they looked at it on paper, thought, looks a bit boring, doesn't look very interesting. But to a man, every one of them has enjoyed the sort of nuances of the 2.8 mile track. It's worked really, really well for them. It's in the grounds of a massive football stadium as well. One of the big teams of Thailand has a stadium right in the front of house. It's on quite a big piece of land. It's owned by the Chang Brewing Company, Mr. Chang, or whatever his actual name is. I have no idea, but his beer is Chang, because I've drunk so much of it, particularly in Thailand. But the point being is that he's dedicated to looking after Buriram, to building something for Buriram. Buriram is a place that people came from, nobody went to. It was one of those places. It's in the middle of the country, and I've got to say, I've been going there 40 odd years to Thailand, and I never bothered going to Buriram until they had a Grand Prix, or actually a World Superbike as well. I think they had it out there once upon a time. So, but it just has. You're right, Amy. It has such an atmosphere from enthusiasm from the fans, and to hear them over the mics, we all know as broadcasters how much those mics are to protect you from hearing things you're not supposed to hear. They're only for us to speak to, or to pick up the sound it's aimed at. And so if you're picking up the crowd sounds on your mics, it is bloody loud.
I think what I loved was also seeing on the world feed is the trucks with all the flags that get everyone around, and the performers that were out before they did the national anthem. It's like you can tell they're so proud, but they're also so happy to have the MotoGP riders there.
They're for sugarcane. Those trucks are actually working trucks for out in the fields for sugarcane. And they bring them all in from all of the countryside. All the farmers bring all those trucks in and livery them up and paint them all beautiful colours and chuck a couple of bales of hay in the back. And basically they're used as the ferries around the circuit to take people around. And it's got like this single cylinder, like sort of cement mixer motor in it. They go tuk, 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 tuk. That's all you get. It fires once every lamppost. And they are just, and it's actually they are actually working vehicles from the farms. It's not something they've sort of concocted for there. It's quite
I
funny. Some
remember
of the
when,
signage in there as well is hilarious, from the very, very rude to the very, very profound.
yeah,
Whatever you want, it's in the truck.
I remember the first year motocross went out to Thailand, that circuit was near Pattaya. I can't remember where it was now. But their little media event they did was tuk-tuk racing. But you put a load of motocross riders on tuk-tuks on a motocross track. Can you imagine how ridiculous it got? Like, the tuk-tuks were being tipped. It was just like probably the most ridiculously, in terms of like a safety point of view, a ridiculous media event to have before your Grand Prix starts.
I saw Red Bull did something similar with Jack and Brad this weekend, and they had them on turbo boosted rice, something harvesters or something or other. Oh, it was hilarious. You guys need to check that out on YouTube. But I can totally imagine what the motocross riders were like. But guys, let's move on to the on-track action. So Sunday's main Grand Prix was obviously wet, and out of what do we have, 22 starters, there was 11 crashes in the end. Just mind-blowing. Lorenzo Salvadori crashing twice as well in the same race. Like, that never happens.
Yeah, people falling off and then getting back on again. And Marc Marquez was one of them as well. Of course, got himself in a bit of controversy when he got the crasher of the year, Joan Mir. This time, Joan Mir didn't do it on his own. He got helped off it by Marc Marquez. Was that penalty enough or not, is the question that was rattling around in my head regarding that particular incident. But yeah, I mean, when you think about how much dry time they'd had, and not hardly any wet time at all, a little bit in the morning for warm-up, and that was it, really. So it was bound to be the case. You know, you haven't tested out how wet, how slippery the white lines are here and there and so on. And do you know what impressed me about this weekend was everybody was on the limit. You know, whether wet or dry, I don't, just right on the absolute edge. I know we say that all the time because they're supposed to be right on the edge because that's what they do. But I think in Thailand, it just, everybody was pushing their luck everywhere, every turn. There were some passes that went on there that you just went, but he made it. So it was quite impressive from that point of view, how they picked up the pace, particularly in the wet. You know, it started off quite fast, but when you looked at the times later on in the race, I know it didn't actually properly dry out. It was still damp all the way through, but they were so close to the edge of crashing all of the time.
I think, like, picking up on the back of that and then reflecting that onto like the championship, that's actually why that was so impressive from both Jorge Martin and Pecco Bagnaia, because going into those conditions where it's so tricky, it's so easy to make a mistake. A mistake at that on that kind of level is a huge blow to your championship. I mean, it could win or lose you a championship had it been Pecco's case. So I think that's actually what makes their rides really impressive.
And that's why it's so important to get that first couple of corners, to make that break on the first lap, to push your luck on the first lap. And in the sprint race on the Saturday, you know, Jorge Martin made a mess of turn one. You know, that's what caused him a problem. And off went Enea Bastianini. He managed to pick up a couple of places in turn one because of the mistake that Jorge Martin made. And there was no real recovery back from that in that situation. But once the race is underway, once it's settled down, it's very, very difficult to make up those kind of places. Unless, of course, you're Marc Marquez, who throws it up the road and then makes up a load of places as well. The guy is remarkable. Actually, I just want to answer a question about it. Ian Tribe 1166 got involved in our preview podcast earlier on in the week and asked, why is Frankie Carcetti not going with Marc Marquez to Ducati, the factory Ducati? And I just wanted to get that in here because Frankie Carcetti, I mean, he's been an exceptional crew chief. If you think Digi's career was saved, Digi saved his own career. I'm not going to say Frankie Carcetti completely saved his career, but if it hadn't been for Frankie Carcetti being able to work with Digi wouldn't even be in MotoGP this year in 2024. Marc Marquez is a poison chalice for a crew chief. If Marc Marquez had come into Gresini and it hadn't worked out, it would have been the crew chief's problem and he would have been the one that got fired, not Marc Marquez. The fact that Frankie Carcetti has put Marc Marquez in a position where Marc Marquez is looking as good as he is testament to the likes of Frankie Carcetti as well. I just hope that Ducati treat Carcetti well. He's staying at Gresini. It's complicated, is all I'll get out of him. He's a Gresini employee, so he's staying at Gresini. I hope that Ducati have recognised what Frankie Carcetti has done, not just over the last couple of years, but in a career of the way he works, and are looking after him well, because he has been absolutely monumentally instrumental in getting this to work for Digi first of all, and now Mark. But
And
he
obviously
stayed
took Juan Mir to his World Championship in 2020 as well at Suzuki.
exactly right. I mean, that's what I meant by his previous is really, really special too. So seems strange to me, because he seems like, unless he's on so much money at Gresini, he just wants to be relaxed at an independent team and take the cash. After a pressurised year like he's had, I would think that might be quite an option. But I just felt that I wanted to, Ian tried 1166, wrote to us last week, and the answer is a non-answer really, because we don't have the absolute details of why he's staying at Gresini and not moving to Ducati. But I thought it was worth a mention up front on our pod.
Keith, can I ask you a question on that? It's digressing from obviously the racing on the weekend, but how important is it for a rider to have a crew chief who they connect with really well, or someone who can read a rider really well and understand what they're going through?
That relationship, when you consider how long, I think Mark might not have, Santi Hernandez, he and Santi Hernandez were joined at the hip for years at Honda. And it really surprised me that obviously Santi stayed where he did, and it's a real relationship. It's almost like a marriage, I would think. It's one of those situations where the relationship works just on a wink of the eye and a flick of the hand in indication of what you want to try and achieve. So for Mark to have a new crew chief in a new team, which wasn't even a factory team, it was an independent team, that's a massive, massive deal for Marquez to have done that in the first place. But conversely, because Frankie Carcetti, everybody looks up at the probably the best rider in the world, and thinks, crikey, if I get this wrong, or if it doesn't work out, this could be the end of a career almost. But he obviously has a manner about him, Carcetti, that works. I mean, he was Jake Dixon's manager for a while. He was instrumental in making sure Jake stayed in the Grand Prix paddock. If he hadn't been doing the deals with Mike Trimby at IRTA and obviously via Dorna to keep the Brit in the championship, Jake might not have stayed in. So he's got several levels to him, Carcetti, and I think that's what works with a rider of the complexity of Marc Marquez, is that you can't see just one thing. You've got to see the overall picture of everything. And I think Carcetti has got that skill. And from a crew chief point of view, there may be people in the team that are better at reading data, that are better at this or are better at that. But Carcetti overall, he's got the surround sound, if you like, of crew chief skill.
You can't imagine Frankie like being a JB or like Galvesera, someone like, who I can imagine doesn't always have a way with words in terms of how they deliver what's going to happen or feedback to the rider. But however, you can imagine Frankie Carcetti, sorry, I'll put my teeth in, just having that little bit of when a race hasn't gone quite so well and maybe a rider needs slightly building up, like with Digi, you can imagine him having that bit more of a personality that is a bit more of a nurturing personality.
You've just said it. Personality is the situation here. Jeremy Burgess, I would counter all the big PR for JB, as you called him. Jeremy Burgess, who was with some fantastic riders, probably back in the day was not a very skilled engineer, technician, and the like. All that skill came through interaction with team and rider. Later on. I mean, JB, I seem to remember, did he used to drive the bus, I think, once upon a time for Suzuki, going back years and years and years. Don't forget, he's quite old as well. JB he had his feet on the ground. I didn't like the way they treated him in the end either. I thought that was awful. I mean, if we're going to talk about people getting dumped, I mean, the bloody world's media knew that he was getting cast aside by Valentino Rossi. It just goes to show how ruthless, riders can be, when they feel they need to be. And the way JB was treated, considering his stature in the paddock and as a man, well, he wasn't treated the best of ways, I don't think. I hope and it's probably the reason why it's in the back of my mind to beat the drum for Frankie Carcetti. I hope he doesn't get sort of cast to one side, having done such great works, and he doesn't find himself working in the factory. Having said that, the factory is a pressurized place. He might be happier where he is. But I have the feeling crew chiefs are just as ambitious as riders quite often. And being in a full factory team, overseeing full factory riders is at the end of the day a Carcetti's, a crew chief's want, really.
Amy, did you see the, I only saw a clip of it, of apparently Marc Marquez's leathers coming undone after he crashed. Yeah, apparently so not like a full Fabio with the zip down, but the little thing that covers the zip was open, and the zip was partially the way down, I believe. And so I've been seeing on socials, there's all this kick up about it with saying that Marc should have been penalized for that. Okay, obviously you haven't seen it, but
no.
Now that I'm bringing that up, what's your thoughts on that? Do you think that that's something? Oh, because obviously we didn't see Marc when he crashed, and once he was further down until he rammed into the side of Joan Mir.
I think maybe you could argue if it's only come partially down that he wouldn't have been aware that it was down. I mean, when it happened, it was Fabio, wasn't it? Quartararo. It was like his whole chest was exposed. Like his chest protector was like, he ditched his chest protector, didn't he? And he was basically like bare chest. And I think you can absolutely say there is a safety concern then, because skin on asphalt or gravel does not mix. But I think if it's only partially away, I think people probably make a little bit of a mountain out of a molehill there.
Well, it's Marc Marquez. They do, don't they?
Yeah.
Well, it's what keeps it exciting, right? But, okay, so if not going to talk about that, let's talk about Pedro Acosta then and his wet podium on Sunday. I was listening to something else while I was researching for the weekend, and they were saying that, Marc Marquez got his first wet podium in his rookie year, and there's all these comparisons, right? But then we've seen Pedro Acosta just crashing so much. And then after Phillip Island, where he dislocated his shoulder, put that back in. Is this the step that Pedro needed? Is this that confidence boost that he needed to get that podium to finish the year off on a high?
He's the real deal at the end of the day. He's had that dip that you would expect in the middle of a rookie season. Blimey, he jumped on MotoGP this year and stunned us all. He had the little dip in the middle. He's come out of that. He's had a couple of clouts that they hurt, At the end of the day, you step off, 300 horsepower motorbike, and they tend to hurt. They sting for a week or two, and he'll be feeling it right into the winter. But the fact of the matter is, he made a comeback. Sometimes it makes it, wet weather makes it easier from the fact you're not putting all the forces through the bike that you would normally be putting through on the dry. So in actual fact, from a physique point of view, it's probably easier on your body. It's not easier to ride in the wet, but it's easier on your body. The performance you're expecting from both bike and man are slightly less than you would have if it was in the dry, where you're sticking it in as hard as you can, and it's very, very physical. It was a great ride from him. Did I feel sorry for Jack Miller? God, I wanted Jack Miller to be a podium. I really did, and that's not because you're on here, Ren. He deserved a result. And you could feel the disappointment for him, bless him. He'd done all the work, and he's just 3 laps from the end. He gets taken by two riders, which is a great shame, in my view. Although Digi, we've got to say, another great ride from him before he clears off for his operation. There are so many storylines in MotoGP, really. Sometimes the actual race doesn't really bear out just how interesting it is of late. It's kind of, there's so much going on, paddock, teams, politics and so on, rules, and it doesn't always bear out in the actual race itself. Sometimes the racing has been quite boring this year, if I'm frank. But I've got to say that the weekend had so many different elements to it of interest that were going on. That opening lap between Pecco and Martin, that opening lap, elbows out, absolutely. Honestly, bloody hell. I mean, I got behind the sofa. Decided to watch it from the safety of the back of the sofa.
I hate the way people say that we as commentators, and I think it is a collective we, because I think everybody shares the same opinion when it comes to Jack, but the fans perhaps seem to think that we're all a little bit too sympathetic to him. And I just think that's maybe comes from a place of like, people don't know the real Jack, and he is just such a great guy. And it has been a real shame to see his form tail off, and for him to, when I think it was not his first or his second year at Ducati, when he started to show a bit of something, he kind of had understood the bike. He was working really well with, was he with, who was he with before Pupilin? Wasn't he with, what's his face? Can't remember what his name was.
You remember when you go down that alleyway and you get halfway down it?
Yeah. We've done one of those. I can see his face. I just can't friggin' remember his name. He's like one of the greatest bloody Ducati crew chiefs as well.
If you guys know it, put it in the comments.
Yeah,
we're talking
good
about.
idea.
Sorry about that. Anyway, Jack was really looking like actually he was going to be, we were going to see the Jack that got launched from Moto3 to MotoGP, and for whatever reason it hasn't come together. But like Keith said, he's had a bit of a torrid, well, not a bit of a torrid year. He has had a torrid year, and it's a shame that it's been so challenging for him. So that, I think, is why people want to see Jack do well.
He finished 5th in a MotoGP race in difficult conditions. And I think for me, the quote of the weekend came from Jorge Martin in Parc Fermi when he said, you don't really understand just how on the edge, how difficult it is. And we're all making these comments, and we're all making, giving everybody the benefit of our viewpoints. Everybody does, because that's what we do. And social media is there for that. But the fact is, these guys, not only have they dedicated their lives from children and been under pressure from children to be where they are now, it means more than you could ever imagine. If you can, as an individual watching this or listening to this, if you can think of the one thing that you have strived for all of your life, never ever taken your eye off it, never ever focused on anything else, I'll bet there's not, a millionth of a % of people that have led their lives in that manner. And Jack Miller has dedicated his life to being where he is. And to finish 5th, he finished 5th in a MotoGP, in the wet, in difficult conditions, in front of his teammate and others of big names. He ain't slow. Jack Miller's not over with. It's just he's had that slightly torrid time. And of course, you get a pile on, don't you? Everybody piles on. It's someone says that Jack Miller's crap, and there'll always be a load of people that agree with them. You only got to see the Marc Marquez comments. I mean, we're going to get slated for bringing up Marc Marquez within the first 5 minutes of this pod, because that's what happens.
I swear you do it on purpose now, Keith.
I do. I mean, like for me, it may, this kind of, you've got to speak as you see it as a commentator, and at the end of the day, that's what I am. I mean, you commentate on what you see. You say what you see and how you see it. Preferably without too much bias. I mean, I think in the days of Carl Fogarty in World Superbikes, I might have been a bit biased in that situation. But as far as MotoGP is concerned, I don't have an axe to grind with anybody. I'm not involved with any team or any rider in any way, apart from Jake Dixon. I love Jake Dixon, of course. But when it comes to MotoGP, I do understand what these guys are putting in. I mean, if you compare that with, again, I'm sorry, Renita, I know I always make you smile. The olden days when people had a pint and a fag and they turned up at the disco, and we had discos then, not clubs. And it was kind of like one of those situations where everybody just partied and enjoyed themselves. Well, that's pretty much been long gone. In fact, the last big party I remember was a Red Bull party somewhere, and they were carrying Jack Miller out like he was a roll of carpet. There was a guy at the front end and a guy at the back end taking him out of this nightclub. That was the Jack of old. He had to tidy himself up when we got to MotoGP. But the point is that there are some riders that fans call to be fired, to be moved on. Really early on, Digi, again, now if I mentioned Digi, that was a good example. It looked like Digi was being shown the door. He was out of a Grand Prix ride. He was going nowhere. And then Carcetti and co managed to get that Ducati to work something like Digi wanted it to work. And before you know where you are, whiz bang wallop, he's right in the front again. So if he got fired, we would have lost a really good Grand Prix rider and a really good bloke in the paddock, just because. And I think the pressure gets even worse when you look at some of these youngsters, like the Acostas of this world that are coming in. They roll over. There's only 22 spots. I've been an advocate of at least another. I mean, we need 24 bikes on the grid, I think, in MotoGP as a minimum. I think that teams should be made to have 4 bikes at least. Mind you, Ducati, I mean, the sprint race, all the Ducatis, 8 of them, they were the first 8 bikes.
Is that the first time in history that they've had all of their bikes? No? Okay.
No, I reckon there's been another time, surely.
Well, yeah, you say surely, but I'm not sure, I mean, probably. I mean, Dr. Martin Rains. I mean, I know Martin watches this sometimes. So Dr. Martin Rains, he's the man for that particular stat. The rest of us are all pale into insignificance when it comes to
Hold on a minute. Whilst we're talking about stats, is this right? Pecco Bagnaia hasn't won a wet race since 2005.
Something ridiculous like that.
That was his first MotoGP wet race win.
Well, I don't know that stat, but it's somebody's dug that out from somewhere, but without actually checking through every piece of paper. This again is a Martin Rains.
I think he said it in an interview. That was my first wet race win since 2005. I might have got the specific year wrong, and then I definitely read it on like a Dorna press release, like his first wet race win in MotoGP, which just seems
ludicrous,
so hard to believe.
Well, yeah. He certainly picked the time to do it because he needed the points.
Yeah, that was, I mean, we spoke on the preview, Keith, about if there was ever a weekend he needed to respond, but I think he does. I think when Pecco does need to step up, and he is with his back against the wall, he usually does. When he kind of didn't take the points he needed to in the sprint, and that points gap increased ever so slightly again, I was like, oh man. Well, take it back even to qualifying. We got on pole position. I was like, yes, this is the kind of response you thought that he needed to bring out, and he's done it. Because Friday wasn't exactly amazing by any means, but he got back out Saturday qualifying, put it on pole position, which was brilliant. Sprint race, I was like, right, it's there, it's happening. And then when he lost a bit more ground in the championship, I was like, this is going to be the weekend where it all comes undone. So I thought Sunday was an amazing response.
Well, I mean, Bastianini managed to save him a little bit of trauma on the sprint race by taking it from basically after Jorge Martin made that cock up in turn 1. Bastianini was away and no one could get near him. But I had a quick look at that, and you talk about stats and stuff like that. I mean, Jorge Martin, 6 wins in sprints. Bagnaia's had 6 wins in sprints. Jorge Martin's only had 3 wins in main races. Bagnaia's had 9 now. But the key stat for me, looking back at it, 15 second places Jorge Martin has had. And of course, that's all he really needs, to finish the season. Second places he's quite happy to take second places. 15 second places during the series already this year, which is why he's those 17 points ahead at the moment.
Well, they say consistency is key, right? And obviously that's the same thing with motorcycle racing. But just to talk about Pecco again with that, I don't know what you guys thought. I feel like I saw the same thing at Phillip Island. Pecco struggled on Friday, struggled on Saturday. Something clicks, and all of a sudden on Sunday, he looks like a different rider out on track. His whole body language, the way he moves, even his facial expressions just look so different. And is this just that methodical Pecco coming into play a little bit more, Keith?
I think you might have nailed it there, because I think that he almost looks emotional on a Friday. He kind of gets it 100%. Half under control he kind of half gets it under control on a Saturday, and by Sunday he's got everything sort of back down to the professor that is Pecco Bagnaia. So you could well be right that the event he's pulling it back just in time for the Sunday grand finale, which he needs to be able to do. But this is going to be about a mistake. Somebody's going to make a huge mistake somewhere. Malaysia, you've got every possibility to make a mistake in Malaysia as well. It's got quick corners, it's got tight corners. It's got an awful hairpin onto the main straight, the final corner of the track. You've got lots of passing places. You've got lots of places that can create aggravation between riders. Opportunities to stuff it up the inside and ram your elbow into somebody. I think that Malaysia is going to. How many times have we said this year so far? Could be the pivotal moment. We keep having them every single weekend. Thailand didn't give us what we might have thought, although we thought we were in for it at the start of that sprint race when they were all bloody sticking elbows into each other. The start of the main race on Sunday. But that kind of petered out a little bit. But I think Malaysia, again, it's also about spoilers. Who's in between? Trying to get somebody in between you. And Marc Marquez is the man for that. But we've got two bloody fast straights in Malaysia, which are going to create a little bit of trouble for the 23 bike compared with the 24. I mean, I thought on the long straight at Buriram, you could absolutely see just how much better those 24 Ducatis got out of the corner. And they just, if you can get 2 mile an hour out of a corner, you're at 6 mile an hour by the end of the straight, because it's just picking up pace all the way down the straight. And again, I think that we're going to see a bit of that at Malaysia.
Amy,
Guys,
when you sighed and you made that jump, I was like, hey, she's onto something here. Right, fill us in.
not that interesting in the great scheme of things. However, when Renita asked that question, I was like, this would be a question really to put to Pecco's crew chief. But it also reminded me of the missing crew chief who I was trying to think of. Christian Gabarini. Of course it was Christian Gabarini. I'm sure Gabarini worked with Miller at one point. Anyway, going back to Renita's question to Keith, do you not think if you put Pecco against Jorge Martin, I think they work very differently. Jorge Martin, to me, is a kind of a Marquez type of rider who doesn't necessarily need to have an absolutely perfect bike underneath him. He just rides what's there. I'd say he is kind of like the younger riders where they're like, yeah, it's great, I'm just going to go. And unless there's something massive that's like, this feels awful, he's going to just carry on and work with what he's got. Whereas I feel like Pecco is a bit of a perfectionist, and he is somebody on a Friday that is chasing that absolutely dialed in, amazing, a bit of like an Andrea Dovizioso, wants to really feel everything, know exactly what the bike is doing, how it's responding. And then on Saturday, when he's got to get on with it, he just gets on with it, which is actually what makes him such a great rider.
I agree. I can't really argue with any of that. And talking about Andrea Dovizioso, we saw some of those Andrea Dovizioso, Marquez kind of moves out of the final turn and in Buriram, didn't we? The kind of cutbacks underneath and the like, and trying to force it through. So yeah, I think you're right. I think that there is no doubt about it. Pecco is more about perfection. I've said it many times about Jorge Martin. His maturity this year has built and built and built and built. It's going to be about a mistake. He's made less of them this year than ever before, and that's why he probably will hang on to this title, I think, by the end of the year. But it's going to be down to a mistake. Right. Someone is going to make a massive mistake somewhere. But Pecco is not immune to that. He's made more mistakes than anybody this year, really, at the front of the field. The amount of DNFs or non-scores he's had this year have been huge, really. And you can't win championships if you're going to keep dropping out of the point situation. We'll see. But I think, you're right. I think that this year, Jorge Martin has ridden to the point where the bike won't give him any more, and he's prepared to ride around it. And I think that Pecco is more of a perfectionist. And you've heard, in interviews afterwards and the like, that we're not quite there. We've got to just make this adjustment or make that, words to that effect. So Pecco is expecting more from the bike. He's putting more pressure on his team as well. They put enough on him, so have some back.
I wanted to ask about the wet tires this weekend, because I noticed on Sunday's race, they were only 9 seconds behind their dry lap times. And normally with wet tires, aren't they usually 12, 15 seconds slower? So is that just the Michelins have improved, or was that the tire surface at Buriram?
I think that it was damp at Buriram. Tires nowadays, they don't have intermediates anymore, because a wet tire virtually doubles as an intermediate and a wet tire. It lasts the distance when the track is drying as well. So I think the times, I would have expected around 10 seconds difference between them nowadays, modern tire wise. And they don't drop quite as hugely as they once used to as well. I mean, they will do when it gets a bit dry, obviously, but I think they held up very, very well. Michelin, they've done a great job since they've been in the sport. In the olden days, it was, Bridgestones had brilliant front ends and not so good rear ends. Michelin sort of balanced it up differently. I remember the riders when they all first tested Michelin's at Sepang. I went out to that Sepang test, and it was a crash fest because bikes are all set up for Bridgestones, and all of a sudden everybody was losing the front end everywhere until they got it all dialed in and worked their way through those the nuances of a Michelin tyre compared with the Bridgestone setup. But nowadays, I think that I'd have preferred a dry race. Obviously, I mean, there was a massive temperature drop as well, which we've got to consider. It was 45-degree track temperature for the sprint race. It was 28 or something for Sunday's main race. These are massive changes in the setup of a motorbike and the way that you work your race out. So those guys rode round, getting back to the point of the question, rode round a lot of problems. A lot of things that weren't perfect. So although we might say Jorge Martin might be the guy that's going to run what he's brung once he gets to it, I think Pecco did a good job at the weekend as well of riding a motorbike that probably wasn't anywhere near perfect, considering the time they'd had to set it up in those conditions.
Do you guys watch with live timing? I obviously used to, when I was at the track, you always watch with live timing because you've got it on your screen. But now I'm at home and I watch like a punter. I never watch with live timing.
You need it on a different computer, don't you? That's the problem. And I think the trouble is with when you're, it's the same for us when we're at track. You're immersed in it. You are looking for every tiny little piece of information. You've got live timing. You've got your phone on. You've got, you're looking at X and you're looking at all the social media sides of things as well to see if you can pick up on something that's been said or been said. Looking for anything that Pernat has said somewhere. Where's Carlo Pernat? Let's get a quick line out of Carlo if we can from somewhere, or whoever else is an outspoken manager. You're going for breakfast in Ducati, and you sit on a table full of other journalists from different countries. And I mean, the intensity from a behind the scenes side of things is fantastic. I mean, I'm making myself hate myself right now because I miss that. I miss that intensity. When you're on a flight, after flight snoring while you're sitting there with your notepad open, talking to some crew chief that's actually been unlucky enough to sleep next to you, which is always. I remember sitting with Andrea Iannone once, and he was like a petulant child on the entire trip. He'd have his toys out the pram because he was bored, and he was like sort of flicking his finger for drink or food or whatever it was. It was an incredible trip. I remember thinking, this guy, you could hold some kind of head doctor's conference with Andrea Iannone sat there. And I couldn't like him. I mean, I love the fact that he's a wild man, but I couldn't like him. I mean, I just thought, God, I'd give you a slap if you were in my team. But it kind of, it is, I love that side of it, that intensity. And here we are nowadays sitting in our sofa watching the same screen as everybody else because, we just can't get out to every race meeting because there's nothing worse than turning up on site as a punter. If you're there and if you're in a team and you're working for Dorna, for BT in my case, Renita, for Fox in your case, then it's great because your focus is on what you've got to do. But turning up and wandering around and shaking hands with people that don't have time, they have time if you're working. Of course they do, because it's their job to look after you as a journo as much as anything. But the fact is they don't have time for chit-chat. Let's have a little chit-chat and a cup of coffee behind the tent. No, I've got bloody motorbikes to go and download data from. I can't be talking to you for the next half an hour. And that's how it is. I mean, so it's not... I miss that. I miss that intensity. I miss that full-on... You don't think about your own family. You don't think about the traumas of what's going on at home. I mean, I'd have 4 kids, upside down motor cars and God knows what, and I wouldn't be thinking about it. I'd just be concentrated on only on what. So selfish. I mean, our game, whether you're a sportsman or a sports journo, is bloody selfish.
I think the thing is, I always said there were 2 years. Obviously, the British Grand Prix, for me, is a great opportunity to go and stay at home because my mum only lives about 40 minutes away from Silverstone. I did it.
You can come and stay here next time then.
Oh, there we go.
You and Sam can come and stay here.
You don't want us right now. It's like the bloody, what's the family?
Adam's family.
Something like that. But staying at home for a MotoGP weekend was just it was too difficult because, like Keith says, you are completely in your own world there. Nothing outside the circuit that's going on really matters. It just takes every last bit of you. And obviously, stories are breaking all the time. So even when you've left the circuit, especially if there's been a bit of a drama and like decisions are being made, penalties are being handed out, in years gone by, things that would have affected the championship narrative and things like that, you're so engrossed in it that the world outside MotoGP for that weekend doesn't really exist. And I do appreciate that, Keith. It's I guess it is very addictive, but I tell you what, working on British Superbikes this year, where we are the sole broadcaster, it's been quite nice to like have not quite so much of that intensity where you're being like elbowed out of the way by other journalists and reporters to try and get stories and get their interviews out first and things like that. I've actually quite enjoyed a little bit more.
Well, that's where me and you might differ slightly, because I quite like the competition. I quite like being the
I'm
man
sure
that
you
elbows
do, Keith. What is it? And all, like, what is the saying about, you know, when you're like, so obviously you're a bike racer, so that's your nature. Getting your own
unfortunately, I get slammed for it even at home. I mean, it's been ground down slightly nowadays. I'm probably the mildest I've ever been in my life, so I must have been bloody horrible just a few years ago.
I think to answer the question that you asked before is like, I had my first taste of it working with Fox at Phillip Island, and I've been talking to Keith off there, and I am hooked. I am like, I want that every weekend. I want to experience it. But then also seeing the side of like my brother once he retired and he stepped away, and he was like, you're just in this whirlwind for so long and it's just never ending. And now he's like a completely different person. So Keith, when I heard you talking about Ian Oney before, I'm like thinking straight away to my brother, like traveling with him and like how like high maintenance and high energy, and like he was always had to be on the go, and now it's just like nothing. He's completely chill. It's a totally different person. But then to also answer your other question, Amy, I don't watch the live timing, but I do quite often go and have a look at the laps after the race just to see the consistency. Because I just even looking at it, I have it up for Fox now, and looking at Pecco's laps from the Grand Prix. Yeah, he did a fastest was a 39.7, but he was constantly around those low, like the 140 lows. And I think stuff like that is so fascinating that even as a person who maybe isn't necessarily watching or wanting to know like too much of the tech stuff, to see that these riders are like almost to like the minute or the minuscule, the point is so fascinating. It's Formula One do that really well, I think, in showing people that. MotoGP can definitely show people that a lot more.
And
I think it tells you some of the stories that are happening, like he said, behind when you're. So for Dorna, you have to interview everybody. So you are interviewing every single person that comes across that line or doesn't come across that line. So you do have to have live timing on, because that does tell you a bit more about what's been going on and who's coming through that they're not showing you on the screens. But it'd be interesting to see if our listeners, how many people do actually use live timing, because there's a live timing app and anyone can log on and watch it.
Do you know what? I mean, you're talking about live timing and all these bits and pieces, and it sounds like we're covering it. And I showed you a load of paperwork just then that I've got here, which has got all the lap times and everything on it. But the fact is, it might as well be written in stone, because it's so far behind in comparison to what the teams are doing when it comes to data acquisition and data that they are disseminating every single weekend. The very, very tiny bits, all in zeros and dashes and X's, all the way through their computer buddy speak. That side of it is the really interesting side of it for us. And I think again, we talked about riders and how they dedicate to try and get themselves to the perfect pitch, if you like, for their performance. But then behind the scenes, there's these guys that are working, the Carcettis of this world, that are working to make those motorbikes work even better. And the data they've got, I mean, I'd like to have a screen with that on it. I'd like to be able to, when you walk into their camp, if you're privileged enough to be able to walk into a MotoGP garage and you look at the screens that they're trying to work, you look at it and it looks like there's more scriggly lines and bloody bits and pieces that crossing over and doing this, that, and the other on just one monitor. And you go, how on earth am I going to work that lot out? you've got to understand where the thing is, what it's doing, combine that with the rider as well. I think we should get Dorna to put one of those screens up as well. So we've got data.
Yeah, 100%. Let's make a
No,
petition.
I'm joking. No.
So no, like
It's going to send
sometimes
everybody
you walk
bonkers.
sometimes you walk into a garage and they'll obviously be quite protective, like especially people like Honda be quite protective over that data. And I remember thinking to themselves, do you think I know what the hell that means? Like, you're all right. I'm not going to be carrying blooming bits of information over to Yamaha. You don't need to worry.
I used to go in the garage and ask them for speeds and gears and revs and all the rest of it. I used to get just the very basics of some of the corners, because some guys might use first gear, some guys might use second gear. They might be pulling different revs. They might be looking for a different. Even getting that basic information out of them is virtually impossible. They don't give away anything at all. I remember saying to Cal Crutto one day, I said, "Have you ever seen a seamless gearbox?" He said, "Seen a seamless gearbox?" He said, "It comes in here covered up. No one sees it at all. It's fitted, and that's it." He said, "I've never seen one." They were so secret back in the day. The thought of somebody that was maybe wearing a head cam or one on your glasses or something like that, and was getting a picture of Honda's seamless gearbox, which at the time was the best, was quite amusing. It's funny. I was looking at this is probably the journalistic side of things. I was looking at the bikes of the weekend and thinking to myself, why are we still running chains and sprockets? It seems like a very old-fashioned kind of drive system, and you kind of start thinking outside of the box of where the next developments are going to come from that are going to fool the organisers in our little tiny skinny rule book, and where GG, the likes of GG is going to come up with something that's within the rules that we're going to find that happens soon.
What could you use instead, though? Like,
well, that's the point, isn't it? I mean, like, seamless gearbox. Whoever would have thought of a seamless, where did that come? It was quite interesting. There was one particular set of corners, I can't remember where it was now, at Buriram, where you could see him stamping on the gear lever. It's very unusual to see that kind of maneuver mid-corner, where most of them were jamming their left foot on the, trying to shift it up through the gears. It's why the gearbox was always around the opposite way to a road shift. A road shift used to be sort of, to go up, it was up to go up a gear, down to go down a gear. Well, you couldn't do that on a race bike because you couldn't get your foot underneath the gear lever when you hanked over at an angle. You'd grind your toes off. So it wasn't a viable thing. Now, and why did they always put neutral between first and second? I mean, who the bloody hell designed a gearbox like that? Nowadays, you've got to push a button or lever or whatever it is nowadays to get it. Neutral is now out the bottom of first gear. It's out the way. So these innovations keep coming, but I don't know. I just suspension pumping and stuff like that is something that has to be dialed out when you're doing it. So when you're gassing it up through it, because of the way the swinging arm is moving and the chain is trying to stiffen the movement up because you're accelerating through it. These are all things that they've got to compensate for to some extent. I wonder what the next innovation will be. But chains and sprockets just seem to be so 1950s. Just doesn't seem to be right. I'm expecting some hydraulically powered, smooth linear system at some stage to be coming into the fore. I mean, maybe they're working on something like that out there anyway. But the technical innovations again are something I love. I wish it was back to the 1950s actually, when you could have a 20-speed 6-cylinder 17,000 RPM revving whatever it was, and the rules were you could do whatever you want to do to make a motorbike go fast. I wonder where we would be if that rule book was that clear nowadays. Bloody hell, we'd be on the moon with them.
Aren't we going the opposite way though in terms of the rules changing?
Yeah. We have to because of cost. I mean, the thing is, back then factories were brand new. Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, they're all brand new. They're all trying to vie for position, weren't they? And the Isle of Man was a big thing back then, which is obviously not now, from a design and aspirational point of view from a factory. Although I've probably shot myself in the foot there. There'll be a lot of people that are writing in now saying the Isle of Man is the top racing thing of the year, but it isn't really from a development point of view anymore, I think is where I'm going, whereas it used to be once upon a time. Don't know. We've got a thin rule book. and roll on Gigi with his next innovation is all I can say. We seem to have
Right,
drifted
guys.
fairly well away from this weekend's racing,
Yeah, we
don't we?
have, and it
Really?
was so good. I feel
Yeah.
so guilty now.
Right,
We're
let's
not giving it enough
We probably ought
credence,
to
have
cover
we?
the Grand Prix.
We've
Yeah.
covered the Grand Prix. Let's move on to Moto2. Ayagura finally won the Moto2 World Championship, and what a race to do it, what a place to do it. It was cool that Moto2 was classed as a dry race after we had the Moto3s with that rain before. But this year, it's hard to deny that, he's consistency, like we spoke about earlier, he's just been consistently up there. He's been strong all year, and it just seems that empty helmets team, he's just gelled and worked with them so well, right?
That always makes me laugh when you call it an empty helmet.
Yeah, empty helmet.
I had an empty helmet, but there was nothing in my head. But I mean, to see Canet win a race and see Ayagura win the championship, I mean, that was a double top, wasn't it, from all our points of view? I mean, it was good to see Canet back on the winning podium step again. Ayagura, great race actually for him. Good to see him, ride into second place, and he'll take the number one plate, Moto2 plate, but of course he goes to Trackhouse next year, so he goes to Trackhouse Aprilia as a Moto2 world champion, which that box is ticked onwards and upwards. Although I am worrying a bit about Aprilia for next year. Be interesting to see what they manage to come up with.
How was that weird pit lane entry crash with Arbolino and
what happened there?
the other rider?
Van der Gorberg.
That's
Yeah.
it. Bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, I can only say that. I mean,
Was it the marshal's fault?
Not well. I wouldn't have said so. No, I think Van der Gorberg was hot. I mean, if you see a marshal running in front of you, you don't really come in quite that hot. But I always have difficulty in blaming a rider for just about anything. Maybe that's because I was one once. But his eye line, his view of it, will have been different from where he was compared from where we were looking at it. To start with, cameras always make things look much shorter in distance. He came in there quite hot. I mean, really, the bike shouldn't have been in the middle of the pit lane anyway, trying to restart it. The marshal was running to try and assist. You would have said Van der Gorberg had plenty of room to go to his right, but somehow he didn't. But he was closing at speed that he obviously misjudged. It's Van der Gorberg's fault, but I always think I'm always a bit lenient when it comes to what was he seeing, what was going on in his brain at the time. He was looking straight ahead. He was looking at it. It wasn't as if he was looking somewhere else. It was just an almighty cock-up. We've seen them. But again, I don't know what he was seeing through his own head. Maybe nothing. Maybe he had an empty helmet.
What about Aldegert in breaking? Did he broke his wrist? He broke his hand this weekend, crashing out. No, the other speed up rider. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's the time of the year where you don't want to be doing any of that.
Yeah, and if it's Aldegert, isn't he? He's moving to MotoGP next year. That's a
that's a done deal. What the team that he's moving to will be. It's always a pain in the backside from a team's point of view, because if you start your testing series with an injured rider, it puts you on the back foot before you even get to next year. They want everybody to be fit when they test in Valencia, freezing cold Valencia. Makes no sense to me at all. So 2 days after we finish Grand Prix racing, suddenly we're at a racetrack that can only end up in disaster. Yeah.
What year is it?
When you're too early.
I know. Come on, I'm just like all over the place this year. Can I ask you guys both a question? Do you get excited by Ayagura?
No, and I know where you're going with that. Yeah, I know exactly
I don't know why. I just don't. He's a really lovely guy, but as a rider and also as a personality, I've never really bought into the Ayagura thing.
I was gutted.
Well,
when
it doesn't excite me at all. Yeah, it doesn't excite me at all. He's going up to MotoGP next year. I'm just going to say it. It might be a bit controversial.
Go on.
Taka Nakagami.
Sos.
Taka Nakagami. I mean, a lovely fella, but I don't know whether it's the inscrutable Japanese manner that kind of transcends, perhaps. When you got the like of Somkiat Chantra and Jake Dixon, who all they have to do is smile and their teeth are everywhere, and everybody sort of warms to them, don't they? I mean, it's outward, Pecco Bagnaia, is he cute? I don't know. I mean, he doesn't. He's not the kind of Marc Marquez again. Oh, sorry, slamming coming my way, incoming. Marc Marquez for me is a bigger personality than Pecco Bagnaia.
But I think Pecco is still very an exciting rider to watch.
Yeah.
For some reason, I've never really found.
You've never really found a world champion to be that interesting.
I don't know what it is. I've just never really, even when he was in Moto3 and everyone's like, oh, this kid's going to be amazing. And I don't know. I've never really got it.
Let's see what our followers have to say on that one. Beware, Amy.
I'm not going to look.
Right. Shall we move on to Moto3? Let's
Luca
talk
Luneti.
about...
I tell you what, I was Luca Luneta, second place for him. I was bloody impressed with that. 18 years old, getting himself on the second step of the podium in not the best of conditions, I thought was pretty cool. I mean, came through CIV pre-Moto 3 into CIV Moto 3, Red Bull rookies. Yeah, he's been pretty quick. But he looks like as the challenge gets harder, he gets faster. Now that is a proper Grand Prix rider.
I just felt really bad for Forasato.
Yeah.
Because he led so many of those laps, and for it to end, I mean, they reinstated him, didn't they?
He got fifth.
I still felt bad.
Didn't he? They said that either his bike or his body has to cross the finish line, because I was watching
Which has changed.
And the bike didn't technically cross the finish line. His body did. Crazy.
I did that at Brands Hatch.
Did you?
Yeah, me and the bike weren't attached. They didn't.
Was it the same rule?
They didn't give it to me though.
Oh no, it was the old rule where the rider and the bike both have to
be connected in some way.
Yeah.
If I'd known that, I'd have just hung on to one bit of it.
Super bandit over the line.
I'll tell you what, you need to look at how far it is out of that last corner to the finish line at Brands Hatch to realise just how far that is. A bloody long way on my arse.
Right, let's talk about David Alonso. He has broken Valentino's record of 12 wins in a season. I think that we're witnessing greatness, and we've been saying this all year, but hashtag baby goat, he's on his way.
I'm not into that. Sorry, guys, I'm going to be the Debbie Downer again. I think that's a lot to put on someone at that age. Hashtag baby goat.
I love it.
I know who exactly would have made that up as well, and his ideas don't ever really.
No, some PR guy sat at the back and thought, "Whoa, we've got an opportunity here." I wonder who's been accredited with the baby goat.
Imagine putting that on some poor kid's shoulders. Do you think he's into it?
Don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, after 12 wins in 1 year, I think they could say anything about him, and he'd be pretty cool with it. But for my value is that I've always said you should judge a rider over 3 years. I think that you can have an exceptional year across all championships, wherever you're going, wherever you're coming from. Second year is always a load harder to consolidate, if you like. And by the third year, if you're still there or thereabouts, then you are going to be something probably a little bit special. Some riders manage to just be that good because they are alien material. We've seen them over the past years of. I won't mention names because there's very few, though, when you think about it, that have come into the sport and have been great right from the beginning. Will Acosta achieve that in an era that is tough? Again, people talk about that horrible phrase, the good old days. The good old days were nothing like as good old days as everybody thinks. That's when someone had a 5-second lead or there was 3 bikes that were nearly a lap ahead of everybody else in the field. That's not good old days. That's bloody rubbish. Compared with where we are now, where 22 motorbikes, if we're talking MotoGP, cross the line within seconds of each other in some instances, and certainly within a second of each other when it comes to qualifying. I mean, Jesus, that is unbelievable when you think of all the different formats of motorbike and setup and rider, and all the combinations that go into that, and we end up with 22 motorbikes within a second sometimes. Some of them timed to, equal on third decimal place. Crazy. So we'll see whether they can live up to the baby goat tag. I've got to say, I think he probably will.
I think he will as well. I think he's pretty special, isn't he? I just don't like the hashtag.
Okay, don't get that tattoo then. All right.
I just have to shout out
on your left buttock.
Keith. Just have to shout out Joel Kelso as well for getting pole position, first Aussie to get a pole position since Jack Miller back when he was in Moto3 all those years ago. So that was an awesome ride for Joel. And I think that for him this year, he's constantly up the front. I don't know if he's got that full race distance in him because quite often we do see him fall back. But happy to see an Aussie get a pole position in Moto3. It's always good for the Aussies to be up
What's
front
he like?
and to represent.
I've never met Kelso. What's he like?
He's a good kid. Yeah. He
I wouldn't pick a fight with him.
Ginger Ninja.
I don't think I would. Actually, didn't he have a bit of a tussle with somebody?
Oh.
In his first year? I can't remember. I'm going to actually take that back just in case I've completely got that wrong.
No, I think that's a reputation he'll be okay with.
I think he is a really great kid. He is a good kid.
Good kid. Like even his story, for those who don't know, single mum, he moved over to Europe when he was 15 with a friend to try and give this a crack. Like his whole story of how he's got to where he is now is really inspirational. Stuff that we don't hear or the storylines that we don't get told because it's always about, I guess, the European riders, maybe the Spanish riders, the Italian riders, but just getting to know him through what he's done. Like he is dedicated. He is trying everything he can to get through, as they all are, but to see him finally get that pole tick.
And that's why we need that ride to survive. We have such great stories from our youngsters coming through, you know, Hannah Carrasco, if you want to go to the women's side of things, you know, the hardship that those guys have gone through to get to where they are is more likely to be in the motorcycle paddock than it is in, say, Formula One, you know, where most of those guys have come from pretty, you know, wealthy backgrounds, for want of a better phrase, but have had I'm not saying it's any easier for the top guys. They've had to work just as bloody hard as the bike racers do as well. But some of the stories in bike racing of where some of these guys have come from to get to where they are now, and what being Casey Stoner, if we stick with the Aussie theme, if you like, you know, Colin and his wife gave up the bungalow in bloody wherever it was. And came to Europe when he was 13. I mean, the dedication, and that could have gone so bloody wrong. You know, as it turns out, Casey Stoner, multi-millionaire. Having said that, it's what was Colin's wife's name? Bronwyn, wasn't it? That was Bronwyn, Casey's mum. You know, that very sadly, it didn't really work out quite so well in the end for all of them as a family, which is a terrible shame. But I think that the pressure that all of them were under for such a long time is a story in its own, in itself. I mean, you know, Casey managed to transcend all of that and become the man that he is. And there's lots of stories like that. You know, bloody hell, Mick Doohan, if you're sticking with that Aussie theory. You know, the first time I met Mick was when he was 16 years old, sat in the corner of a concrete bloody pit lane in South Africa at Carl Army. I think a ride to survive, you know, Liberty need to really, really put the right production team on this, because there are so many of these wonderful stories behind it. You know, you could sit the old farts like me down and talk through all the stuff from the past and bring that up to date to where we are now. There are so many great stories of adversity being turned.
And in the meantime, go and watch Born Races, because I think that does give you a little bit of a glimpse. That focuses on the Red Bull rookie riders, but that's like a great example of taking a bunch of kids all trying to make it into the MotoGP paddock. They're not even in there yet, and everything they've had to give up, the things that they have to go through, it's wild. And they're kids.
I was thinking of a name of a movie, but I don't think it didn't have anything to do with motorbikes, but it should have been. Was there a Natural Born Killers anywhere?
What?
That could easily be the name of a motorcycle, because they're all prepared to do whatever it takes to get to wherever they're going at the end of the day.
So that's what we're going to call our Netflix series, is Natural Born Killers.
Yeah.
The three of us will narrate it.
There was a natural born winners, I think there was, that JT was in at some stage. There was a series in the UK that I think it was called Natural Born Winners, that James Toseland starred in. I remember him getting whipped by a stick by a man that was teaching some kind of Japanese martial art. JT's one of those guys. JT looks like he couldn't, you know, he is a bit fluffy to look at, but there is nobody. JT is completely not what he looks like. If you got him riled, he is pretty focused, shall we say, when it comes to competition. Or I wouldn't take him on, even from behind.
Right. Well, I think I can
Natural
hear
born
Amy's
winners.
little
You
ones
have to look the series up. Natural born winners.
Natural Born Winners. Yes, guys, do check it out. But yes, I can hear Amy's little ones in the background. So I think we need to call this a day. Amy, Keith, thank you so much for chatting MotoGP with me. Love catching up with you guys. And for our listeners, if you can't get enough of OMG MotoGP, then do check out our socials at OMG MotoGP on all of the platforms. Or if you have a question for us, you can email our team, omgmotogp@gmail.com. But we're going to be back real soon with more OMG MotoGP.